In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to use pivot table timeline slicers in Excel. We'll start by opening Microsoft Excel. Once Excel view is open, the goal is to work with a pivot table and then add a timeline slicer so you can filter date-based data in a much more visual way. A timeline slicer is essentially a visual filter made specifically for pivot tables that contain dates. Instead of manually adjusting filters, you can use a sliding timeline bar to explore your data by days, months, quarters, or years. This makes reports much easier to read and much more interactive, especially when you're analyzing trends over time. To begin, create your pivot table. Select your source data, including the headers. In this example, the fields include date, region, product, and sales. After selecting the full data range, go to the Insert tab and choose Pivot Table, then click OK. This creates the pivot table area where you'll build your summary. Next, build the pivot table using the Pivot Table Fields panel. Drag the date field into the rows area. Then drag sales into the values area, where Excel will typically summarize it as sum of sales. If you want a more detailed report, you can also drag region or product into columns or filters. At this point, you should have a basic sales summary organized by date. Now that the pivot table is ready, insert the timeline slicer. Click anywhere inside the pivot table first, because Excel needs to know which pivot table you want to control. Then go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab and select Insert Timeline. A list of date fields will appear. Check the box for date and click OK. You'll now see a timeline bar appear on the worksheet. Once the timeline is visible, you can start filtering your data. You can drag across the timeline to select a specific date range or switch between different time levels, such as years, quarters, months, or days, depending on how detailed you want the analysis to be. For example, if you select January through March 2026, the pivot table will show only first quarter sales. If you switch the selection to April through June 2026, it will update to show second quarter sales instead. The most useful part of this feature is that your pivot table updates automatically. As soon as you change the timeline selection, the summarized results refresh instantly. So if your table is showing monthly totals like January, February, and March, those values will adjust immediately based on the period you select. That's how to use pivot table timeline slicers in Excel to make your reports faster, to filter, easier to understand, and more dynamic to analyze.